War is an algorithm. We will show its price. In March 2022, Western nations imposed the most comprehensive sanctions regime in history, targeting one country, Russia. Scale, unprecedented. Result, everyone pays. The numbers are stark. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, over 16,000 individual sanctions designations were imposed on Russian entities and individuals within the first 18 months of the conflict. The European Union froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. Energy trade worth $150 billion annually was targeted for reduction or elimination. SWIFT banking system access was severed for major Russian banks. Technology transfer stopped. Investment flows reversed. This was economic warfare, total economic warfare. And like all warfare, it has costs. The question is, who pays them? The immediate impact hit Russia. GDP contracted 2.1% in 2022, according to World Bank data. Trade flows disrupted. Inflation spiked above 17%. Capital flight exceeded $200 billion in 2022. Approximately 1,000 Western companies exited the Russian market, per Yale School of Management tracking. Total assets abandoned or sold at distressed prices. $100 billion. This was the designed effect. Maximum economic pressure. Force capitulation through financial strangulation. They said, sanctions will cripple Russian war capacity within months. They got adaptation, substitution, and redistribution of costs across global economy. But isolation is a two-way door. Europe relied on Russian natural gas for approximately 40% of supply in 2021. When flows stopped, whether through sanctions or Russian counter-restrictions, replacement was not simple. According to European Commission data, European natural gas prices increased 300–400% in 2022. German industry paid $200 billion in additional energy costs in 2022–2023. This is not sanction cost paid by Russia. This is sanction cost paid by Germany. The multiplier effects cascade. High energy costs forced industrial reduction. BASF, Germany's largest chemical company, cut production 30% and shifted operations to China and US, citing European energy costs. Aluminum smelters across Europe closed. They cannot operate profitably at European electricity prices. According to European industry associations, approximately $350 billion in industrial output was lost or relocated in 2022 to 2024 due to energy price shocks. These are permanent closures. The capital moved. It will not return. The inflation transmission was global. Wheat prices surged 40% in early 2022 as Ukrainian exports stopped and Russian, Belarusian fertilizer became unavailable. According to UN Food and Agriculture Organization data, food price inflation contributed to political instability across North Africa and Middle East. Sri Lankan government collapsed, partly due to inability to manage food fuel cost increases. Bangladesh faced foreign exchange crisis. Pakistan negotiated IMF bailout. These are not Russian costs. These are distributed costs of economic warfare. The financial architecture reveals deeper problems. Freezing $300 billion in Russian central bank assets established a precedent. Western financial institutions can seize sovereign wealth at political discretion. According to Bank for International Settlements analysis, this triggered reassessment by multiple countries of dollar reserve holdings. China reduced U.S. Treasury holdings by $170 billion from peak to late 2024. Saudi Arabia diversified reserves. India increased gold purchases. The trend is consistent. Reduce exposure to assets that can be frozen politically. This is the long-term cost. Dollar dominance in global finance depends on trust that assets are safe from political interference. That trust is now qualified. According to IMF data on reserve currency composition, the dollar share of global reserves declined from 59% in 2021 to approximately 56% in 2024. This seems small. It represents $1.3 trillion in shifted assets. Every percentage point of dollar decline reduces U.S. ability to finance deficits cheaply. The current U.S. federal deficit is $1.7 trillion. If dollar demand weakens, financing costs rise. This is multi-decade cost accumulation from one sanctions decision. The evasion networks scaled the problem. Russia now trades heavily with China, India, Turkey, UAE. According to Russian customs data, trade with China increased from $140 billion in 2021 to over $220 billion in 2024. India purchased virtually zero Russian oil in 2021. By 2024, India was Russia's second-largest oil customer at approximately $40 billion annually. These flows bypass Western financial systems. They use rupees, yuan, and barter mechanisms. Each transaction outside dollar system weakens dollar network effects. They said, no economy can survive isolation from Western financial system. They got accelerated development of alternative financial architecture that reduces Western leverage permanently. The energy market restructuring is irreversible. Europe built $60–80 billion in LNG import infrastructure in 2022–2024 to replace Russian pipeline gas. This is sunk cost. According to energy consultancy Wood Mackenzie, European LNG import capacity now exceeds 200 billion cubic meters annually. This capacity must be utilized to justify investment. So Europe is now locked into long-term LNG contracts with US, Qatar, and other suppliers, at prices 40–60% higher than pre-2022 Russian pipeline gas. Russia, meanwhile, redirected energy exports east. The Power of Siberia 2 pipeline to China, if completed, will export 50 billion cubic meters annually. Arctic LNG projects target Asian markets. According to International Energy Agency projections, by 2030, Russia will export similar total volumes as 2021, but with completely different customer base. European leverage through energy dependence is gone. This was a strategic asset. It was traded for short-term sanctions pressure. The asset cannot be recovered. Consider the corporate costs. Western companies that exited Russia lost assets worth $70–100 billion. They also lost market access in a country of 144 million consumers. According to company financial disclosures, McDonald's wrote off $1.4 billion. Renault sold its Russian operations for 1 ruble plus future profit shares, effectively a $2+ billion loss on book value. Shell and BP abandoned joint ventures worth $20+ billion. These losses are permanent. The Russian market is now occupied by Chinese, Turkish, and domestic companies. When sanctions lift, Western companies will not simply return. Competitors are entrenched. The enforcement costs multiply. According to U.S. Treasury reports, sanctions enforcement requires extensive monitoring, compliance verification, and legal proceedings. The U.S. employs over 3,000 people in sanctions-related roles. The EU created new agencies. Banks spend billions on compliance systems. According to industry estimates, global financial system spends $50 billion annually on sanctions compliance. This is deadweight loss. It produces no value. It is pure overhead to prevent prohibited transactions. The secondary sanctions create distortions. To prevent sanctions evasion, Western nations pressure third countries not to trade with Russia. But these countries have their own economic interests. India needs cheap oil. Turkey needs Russian gas and trade. China sees strategic opportunity. According to trade data, Russia-India-China triangle trade increased 400% from 2021 to 2024. Western pressure creates resentment without compliance. This weakens U.S. diplomatic capital. Diplomatic capital is finite. Spent on sanctions enforcement, it is unavailable for other priorities. The technology sanctions reveal the deepest costs. Restricting semiconductor and advanced technology sales to Russia was intended to degrade military capacity. According to U.S. Commerce Department data, chip exports to Russia dropped 90%. But chip exports to Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan increased 300–600%. These are transshipment points. The technology still reaches Russia, just through intermediaries who capture margin. Meanwhile, the restrictions accelerated Chinese technology independence. According to semiconductor industry analysts, China invested over $150 billion in domestic chip manufacturing in 2022–2024. This investment was directly triggered by fear of technology sanctions. In 2018, China imported 90% of advanced semiconductors. By 2030, China targets 70% self-sufficiency. This is a direct result of sanctions demonstrating supply chain vulnerability. When China achieves semiconductor independence, U.S. leverage through technology restrictions disappears. This is strategic cost, far exceeding any Russian impact. They said, technology restrictions will cripple Russian military-industrial capacity. They got acceleration of global technology bifurcation that reduces long-term U.S. influence over technology standards. The aggregate calculation is sobering. IMF estimates Russian GDP loss from sanctions at approximately 150 to 200 billion cumulatively through 2024. European additional energy costs, $300+ billion, global food price inflation impact, $100+ billion in developing countries. Financial system compliance costs, $150+ billion over 3 years. Lost Western corporate assets, $70–100 billion. Accelerated de-dollarization reducing U.S. financing advantage, potentially trillions over decades. The cost distribution is asymmetric. Russia pays up front through GDP contraction and isolation, but Europe pays through permanent energy cost increase. Developing countries pay through food inflation. Western companies pay through lost market access. The global financial system pays through reduced trust and increased compliance costs. The U.S. pays through eroded dollar dominance. The sanctions continue because the political cost of lifting them exceeds the economic cost of maintaining them. But the economic costs accumulate. Energy infrastructure redirects. Trade relationships rebuild. Financial systems diversify. Technology supply chains bifurcate. Each month adds irreversibility. The algorithm completes itself. Sanctions impose costs on target. Target adapts by redirecting trade and investment. Redirection creates new relationships. New relationships become new dependencies. New dependencies create political resistance to reintegration. Resistance to reintegration makes sanctions permanent. Permanent sanctions mean permanent cost distribution. This is not Russia paying. This is everyone paying. The question was never whether sanctions have costs. The question was whether the cost distribution justifies continuation. That question has no economic answer, only political ones. And political answers do not account for accumulated losses that compound across decades. The final cost is systemic. Economic integration was a strategic choice. It created interdependence that raised the cost of conflict. Sanctions prove that interdependence can be severed, but only by accepting that everyone loses. The precedent is set. Any country with significant reserves in Western systems now knows those assets are at risk. Any country dependent on Western technology knows that access can be revoked. Any country integrated in dollar-based trade knows that system can exclude them. The response is predictable. Reduce integration. Build alternatives. Diversify dependencies. This is the opposite of globalization. It is deliberate economic segmentation. The efficiency losses are enormous. Specialized economies are more productive than self-sufficient ones. Forcing self-sufficiency through sanctions reduces global productivity permanently. They wanted to isolate one country. They fragmented one system. The cost of fragmentation exceeds the cost of isolation. And fragmentation, unlike sanctions, cannot be reversed by policy change. It is structural. It is permanent. It is the price everyone pays.